All right, we're ready for Matthew chapter 24. Appreciate Drew teaching the class last week. We're getting that his job. In that, we're going to pick up in chapter 24, get back into chapter 23 as an introduction to that here in just a moment. We are in the latter part of this outline where we're dealing with him being honored as a king in 19 to 25. In the Judean ministry, as he's come back there, this is also what we refer to as the Passion Week. We're during Passion Week. This is on Tuesday. I don't have the calendar before us on these slides, but we'll come back to that calendar of the week and what goes on in each day of the week. And we'll be talking about Tuesday all day today. That was chapter 22, 23, and that'll be chapter 24. Will happen on Tuesday of Passion Week. Get your hand up if you need questions for next week. We don't have any more for today. Next week, Sam has that. You need that. All right, let's move on. Let's review our chapters quickly, and then we'll get into chapter 24. Chapter 1 was genealogy and birth of Christ. Very good. Chapter 2. Very good. Chapter 3.
John the Baptist, the baptism of Jesus.
All right, good. Chapter 4. Temptation and beginning of the Galilean ministry. That's where the Galilean ministry started. Chapter 4. Chapters 5 through 7. Sermon on the Mount. 8 and 9. Miracles of discipleship. Very good. Chapter 10. Very good. Chapter 11. Where John
Sends messengers.
sent messengers, and that was the great invitation. Chapter 12. Good. Chapter 13, or the obvious, easy one. Parables. We always go to chapter 13 for parables. Chapter 14. John the Baptist is beheaded, parallel with Mark 6. That's the most notable one. Chapter dealing with that. Chapter 15. Yeah, eating with unwashed hands. Chapter 16. Peter's confession. Chapter 17. Easy one. Transfiguration. Chapter 18 deals with relationships. Chapter 19. Read on the screen. You ready? Divorce, remarriage. And then chapter 20. Very good. And chapter 21 begins Passion Week with the triumphal entry. Then last week you looked at chapter 22. Parable of the wedding feast, exchange of questions. And then chapter 23.
Rebuke of the Pharisees.
Yeah, rebuke of the Pharisees. That's scathing rebuke of the Pharisees. All right. This little three-point outline is not original with me, but chapter 23, 24, and 25 do seem to lie together as a unit of chapters. And chapter 23 deals with the nation being rebuked, that is a Jewish nation, a city destroyed, chapter 24, and chapter 25, the world judged. And those are not chapter titles, as I would give that, but it does summarize what each of those three chapters. He rebukes the nation, describes the destruction of Jerusalem, and then he talks about the judgment of the world in chapter 25, which is now at the end of chapter 24. All right, it's question number 1. What's the main point of chapter 24? Destruction of Jerusalem. Now, at the end of chapter 23, when Jesus comes to Jerusalem, or has come to Jerusalem, just touch on this briefly because we've got quite a bit to deal with in chapter 24. It is a tough chapter. It is a highly controversial chapter in the religious world, controversial among brethren. So we've got a lot of wrinkles to see if we can iron out in chapter 24. But at the end of chapter 23, he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often when I've gathered you together as hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." In other words, he describes their rebellion against God and against him, that he laments as he looks at Jerusalem, the opportunity that you had, the chance that you had, and yet you were not willing. It's like God holding his arms outstretched and they would not respond or come. And that your house is left desolate. So he denouncing the nation of Israel and their rejection of God. And Now chapter 24 deals with the destruction of Jerusalem. Here are 3 points that happen in chapter 24. And if we can see it in this format, I think the chapter is going to make some sense to you. And I'm going to try to present to you some what the possible views are of chapter 24, and tell you the one I think makes sense and why it makes sense to me. One, let's just start with those views. One is that chapter 24, this is in the denominational world. Estimates have been that 80% of the religious world believes in, quote, Christianity, now put that in quotations, believes in premillennialism. Being the case, then most of our religious friends believe in premillennialism in some shape, form, or fashion. And most of those think that Matthew 24 is talking about the end of time. The whole chapter. Signs of the second coming. Signs of the end of the world. And so most of those premillennialists are dispensationalists. When there is an outbreak of a war in the Mideast, which is constantly some conflict. And so you have Hamas and Israel fighting with one another, the Palestinians, and Israel fighting with one another, or Iran or Iraq begins to flare up and have a battle like in the 90s, the Gulf War. When the Gulf War broke out, there were hundreds, literally hundreds of books came out in a 4-week period. Hundreds of books came out of the signs of the end of time. Because now there's wars and rumors of war. And so the end is coming. Christ is about to return. Things are getting closer to the end of time. Well, obviously that view is not true. And I'm going to show you why that's not true. Another view of Matthew 24 is that Matthew 24 is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem from beginning to end. The whole thing is. He never talks about the second coming of Christ. I don't think that's correct. I think the appropriate approach to Matthew 24 is he does talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. There is a turning point at verse 34 and 35. And then he talks about the end of time and the second coming. And I'll give you evidence why I think that's the case. So, let's talk about the announcement, the questions, and then the answers. There's first of all the announcement in verses 1 and 2. Let's get what the announcement is. That Jesus went out from the temple, and the disciples came to him showing him the buildings of the temple. They're quite elaborate, they're quite impressive. They're looking at the temple, not fully understanding what's going to happen soon. And Jesus said, do you see all these things? Then not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. In other words, they're looking at all the temple and all of the temple complex and the temple compound. And Jesus says, every bit of this is going to be torn down. Every bit of this is going to be destroyed. There's not one stone sitting on top of another that will be tossed down. So that's an announcement of the destruction of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the heart and the center of Judaism. To destroy Jerusalem was thought to be the destruction of the world. It's all over for the Jews. Now, let's fast forward now a few years, and we know that in AD 70, the Romans came in and destroyed Jerusalem. It was an utter destruction. Titus, the Roman general, marched in with his army and destroyed and completely obliterated the temple compound so that the temple was destroyed. That took place in AD 70. We know that historically. Josephus talks about it in detail and what an utter destruction it was, how terrible it was. So we know that happened. Whether this is what this is talking about or not, we know from history that Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. Since AD 70, the destruction has been so complete of the Jewish nation as a whole. I don't mean that they were wiped out because they're Jews, obviously. Israel exists. But there's not a Jew living today that can tell you of which tribe they belong. There's not a Jew that can say, I am of the tribe of Levi, and I know that because I can trace the lineage. They can't do that since AD 70. That's the utter destruction that took place. So that's the question of the announcement. Now there's a question that takes place, and actually there are questions that take place in verse 3. And let's see what the questions are. Look at verse 3. This is answer to your question number 2. In the interest of time, I'm just going to give the answer to that. The question was, look at verse 3. Now as he said at Mount of Olives, they went out a little further from Jerusalem, The disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be? These things. Well, what has he just talked about? In verse 1 and 2, the destruction of Jerusalem. He just announced that. They went further to ask, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, what were they asking? In the mind of the Jews, several commentators make this point, that in the mind of the Jew, that the Jews really weren't thinking that the end of time and the destruction of Jerusalem were two different things. My response to that, I don't care what was in their mind. Does that make sense? I really don't care what was in their mind. What I do care about is the answer Jesus gave. That's like someone asking us a question and where they're equating two things as if faith and opinion are the same thing. And in their mind, they're equating the same. I'm interested, though, in the correct answer to that more than I am what's in their mind. Make sense? So yes, in the mind of the Jew, if Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, that is the sign of the end of the age, that it's all over. End of the world. So tell us when this is going to take place. But actually, there are two questions there. Though they may think it's one, there are two questions. And what are they? When will these things, the destruction of Jerusalem, be? And what's the sign of your coming? Which is the end of the age. Those are two questions. Those two questions he answered. So let's look at that from an outline standpoint, and then we're going to work our way through those points. Let's go back to this outline right here. In verses 4, now here are the answers. We looked at the announcement, the questions, now the answers. He talks about the destruction of Jerusalem from 4 to 34. 35 to 51, I think he's talking about the second coming. You say, how do you know that? Well, before we go through 4 through 34, let's talk about how we know that, and then we'll come back and talk about that. You might make a note or a mark. If you agree, if you don't agree, then don't do that. But this, between 34 and 35, is a transition point. So let's go to verse 34 and underline some things. In fact, let's back up to verse 33. So you, when you see all these things, what things? The things we're going to go back and discuss in a moment. All the signs, like the wars, rumors of wars, pestilences, famines, etc. All those things. When you see those things, then you know it's at the very door. I surely say to you, and you might underline in your Bible, this generation, the people then living, will by no means pass until all these things take place. There are people living in the time of Christ would still be living when the things from verses 4 to 34 take place. So, if that's talking about what's going to happen in the future, yet from this point, from our point, from 2019 forward, then there's somebody that was living in the time of Christ still alive. 2,000 years old. I don't believe that. I've seen some old people. I'll tell you, they look up. They didn't look that up. I don't believe that. I don't think you do either. So, when let's say Israel and Iraq breaks out in war. Israel and Iran break out in war. I mean, it's a devastating war. You watch and see, mark my word, there will be hundreds of books come out at the end of time. It's coming. Wars and rumors of war breaking out. That's not what this is all about. How do you know? Because this took place before the people then living would die. Now, back to verse 33. They would see these things. Now, he says, heaven and earth will pass away. That's the end of time. But my word by no means pass away, but of that day. What day? The day you just mentioned. Heaven and earth will pass away. No one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And then he discusses that. So he said, how do you know? How do you know that 4 to 34 talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, and that he transitions? Right here is the transition point. That he makes a distinction in observing those things and when they would take place, and then when heaven and earth would pass away. And we'll show a contrast in the context in a moment. Make sense? All right, let's back up now and let's talk about what he says about the destruction of Jerusalem. And So I don't mean to treat this as a trivial matter, but let's just suppose here is an expression in this context. Let's just take one and let's just suppose we don't understand what that is. The pestilence, verse 7. You may not have it in your translation, it's missing from the minority text. You'll find it King James, New King James, but it's missing from the minority text, so it's missing from all the others. But anyway, let's just take the word pestilence, and suppose we can't figure out what that is. What is it? What it's talking about? We don't have a clue. I'm not too bothered by it. Because that's something that took place before AD 7. And it's not something I'm watching for so that I can know when the second coming is taking place. It's already took place, long before I was ever born. So I'm not too worried about it, understanding fully what that is, though I think I can understand pestilences. Now, let's talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. He talks about what's taking place before the tribulation, that is the attack on Jerusalem, the tribulation itself, the attack on Jerusalem, and after the tribulation, and then when this thing will happen. So let's see if we make some sense about it. Before the tribulation now, 4 to 14. So here's what's going to happen before, and I know I'm kind of moving on at a pace, but we've got to get through. I want to get this chapter wrapped together and make some sense of it. Verse 4, take heed that no one deceive you. We're trying to drive some practical things home. And one of the things I learned from verse 4 in a practical sense, we are responsible when we are deceived. Someone deceives you and leads you astray. You say, well, they're responsible for misleading me. Yeah, that's true. But you're responsible too. Because here's the one, don't let anyone deceive you. Because, verse 5, there are many will come in my name saying I'm the Christ. Well, the Jews were looking for the Messiah. And they rejected Jesus as the Messiah. And before the destruction of Jerusalem, there's going to be people rising up, I am the Messiah. I am the one the Old Testament prophesied. They didn't believe Jesus of Nazareth was. And so they're going to be false Christs, and they're going to come. Verses 4 and 5. And they'll deceive many. Verses 6 and 7, there's wars and rumors of wars. The Roman period of peace coming to an end before Jerusalem is destroyed. The retentions that started building as early as 50 AD. The Jewish wars were fought between 65 and 72 AD. This was part of the culmination of that. At Caesarea, 20,000 Jews died. At Alexandria, in Egypt, 50,000 died. At Damascus, 10,000 died. There were a lot of wars during that period. And so there's going to be wars, there's rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. Nation is going to rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And so, following our list, there's wars and rumors of wars. Now, verse 7 talks about natural calamities are going to take place. Like what? Earthquakes. Famines. The King James, New King James add the word pestilence, disease, plagues. And so there's going to be national calamity. So here's some things before this ever takes place. When's this all going to happen when Jerusalem's all destroyed? Well, before that time, there are going to be some false Christs rise up. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars, natural calamities, persecution, verses 8 through 10. And all these are the beginning of the sorrows. And there's going to be tribulation, and they will kill you. You'll be hated by the nations for my sake, the disciples. And many will be offended. In other words, when under pressure, some people stumble. If we suddenly face severe persecution, just take out of this number, there would be people that would surprise us and shock us at how strong they would stand in the midst of that pressure. There'd be others that you think, I know they'll stand, they'll scatter back off. It's going to happen. It's going to happen here. And they'll be offended and they'll betray, and they'll hate one another. Verse 11 says something else is going to take place. Many of them. False prophets will arise, and they're going to deceive many. Verse 12 and 13. And because of lawlessness, and because lawlessness will abound, in other words, because sin is all around, what's going to be the result? They're going to apostatize because of sin around, but he describes that apostasy in the form of the love of many will wax cold. That's indifference and apathy. They don't care. The permeation of sin in our society will cause some people, in that society, same would be true in our society, cause people to become apathetic and indifferent. And the one who endures to the end will be saved, he said. Now, verse 14, here's one other thing that's going to take place, and that is, before the destruction, the gospel's going to be preached to the world, to the Gentiles. Well, it did. Because before the destruction of Jerusalem, you have the gospel going to the household of Cornelius in Acts 10. Remember that. Evidence that it went to all the world, Romans 10 and verse 19, Colossians 1:23 talk about that very thing taking place. So this in verses 4 to 14 is what takes place before the tribulation now. All right, let's go back and so we talked about what goes before the tribulation. Now let's talk about the tribulation itself, which is the destruction of Jerusalem, beginning at verse 15. So let's talk about the tribulation. What's going to take place in the tribulation is in verse 15. You'll see the what? The abomination of desolation. Oh my, what's that? Well, let's go to Daniel 9. That is a quotation from Daniel 9. Verses 23 to 27. Time would forbid us to give a detailed analysis of Daniel 9. It is a complicated text concerning Daniel's 70 weeks. Well, that's interesting, but I'm not going to take the time to go through all of that. But the culmination of the 70 weeks, we all agree, culminates in the destruction of Jerusalem. And Daniel had prophesied that there would be the abomination of desolation in this period of the destruction of Jerusalem. For example, he said, I'm reading at verse 26, that at the end of verse 26, and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's the destroying of the temple. And then notice at verse 27 that, and the wing of the abomination shall come and make desolate. In other words, there is this abomination of desolation. Well, for a Gentile, Titus, the Roman general coming in with his army and marching right into the sanctuary, where only the high priest would be allowed, that is an abomination. And then went in and destroyed the temple. So that's what he's talking about in verse 15. So the point is that the Roman army is going to be in the temple. That is an abomination. And they're going to destroy the temple. This is when the temple is going to be destroyed. They're going to be Gentiles, the armies marching right into the temple. Well, in verse 16 through 20, here is a point that's very important. And that is, during this time, you're going to flee. If this is talking about the second coming, where are you going to flee? Where are you going to go? You're going to flee to the mountains and be any better when Christ comes? You're going to hide under the rocks and be any better? If it's talking about the second coming, how is fleeing going to help? There is a fleeing that can take place. And so, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains to get away from this destruction. And it's going to be so quick and so utter. Those that are on the housetop don't need to go down and take anything out. Just flee. Get out as quick as you can, in other words. And the one that's out in the field, don't go back to the house and get anything. Verse 18. And those that are pregnant and nursing babies in those days, it's going to be hard on them. So what do you do? Verse 20. We talk about this in the lessons on providence. Pray that your flight be not in winter. So pray to God that when this destruction comes, God's been saying it's going to come since Daniel's day, then pray that this is going to take place in winter, because during winter it's going to be harder to flee. It's going to be harder to run, harder to go. So during the tribulation, the Romans are coming into the temple. You need to flee. And then there's going to be a great tribulation, 21 and 22. What does he say about the tribulation?
It's so great it ain't been seen since the beginning of time.
Yeah. There's been nothing like this before. Nothing like it before. There's going to be nothing like it after. It is going to be so intense. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it's so intense that the mercy and the grace of God did what to this? Shortened it. Yeah, shortened it. Because if it wasn't shortened, what's the point? No flesh would be saved, verse 22. It had to be shortened. So we're seeing a picture, and time would forbid us to go and trace, and I didn't bring any quotations from what's the story? Josephus. That talks about how utter this destruction was and how intense it was. If you want to go trace Josephus, some of you may have Josephus, all of his works in some of your Bible programs, you can trace the destruction of Jerusalem. But the Romans are coming in, and you can flee away from that. It's so intense, it's a great tribulation. Right in the middle of the tribulation now, there's going to be some false Christ. Now this is a difficult section for me. It may not be for you, but it is for me. There's going to be some saying, look, here is the Christ, or there, don't believe it. During both before and during the tribulation, there's going to be some saying, this is the coming of the Christ. This is the Messiah has come. And it is the coming of the Messiah in the sense of coming in judgment. Matthew 10:23 uses the coming of the Lord in the sense of judgment. There is the comings of the Lord in the sense of judgment in places. But that's not really, I think, what he's talking about here in verse 24. 23 and 24. The false Christ will arise, and they're going to try to deceive even the elect, that is, the people of God. And now verse 25. What's the point?
So he's told what's going to happen, not to believe. This is what's going to happen during the destruction. You're going to have false Christ arise, and you're not going to believe it.
The fact that I've warned you means that you're without excuse. But if you come up and follow after these false Christs, you're without excuse because I told you ahead of time. I've warned you. And so I told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, in the desert, he's come and he's in the desert, don't go out there. Or look, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe it. Now why, if someone says, well, I think the Christ has come, the Messiah has come. And I think then in verse 27, let me footnote right here. If we missed this one, I think we missed the passage. And I may have missed it, but see if I did. They're thinking of the Messiah. The Jews would be thinking of the Messiah coming the first time because they don't think he's come at all. Remember that? They rejected Christ. But since Christ has come, I think he turns in verse 27 and does reflect on his second coming. So when they say, oh, he's over in the desert, let's go out there, the Messiah has come. Or he's in the inner room, let's go over there and let's see. Don't fall for that. Because, verse 27, when he does come, what? Everybody's going to see it. As the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. When Jesus comes, you're going to know it. When he returns, you're going to know it. And there's no, let's go see. I think he's come. Let's go over here. They say he's over here in the desert. Or they say he's up in the mountains. Or he's over here in one of these rooms over here. Let's go over there and let's see if we can find him. Don't fall for that. Because when he comes, you're going to know it. You're going to know it. Now, verse 28. For where the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. It's a picture of vultures feeding on a dead carcass. The eagles are pictured as being the Romans. The carcass, Jerusalem. Jerusalem like a dead carcass. I won't go into, Pope in his work talks about the eagle. Eagle was an insignia for that the Romans wore. Perhaps that standing, well, I know it stands for the Romans because it's in the context of what he's talking about, but there may be a play on the words in there. And I'll leave that to you to pursue. But it's the picture of the Romans are as an eagle feeding on the carcass of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is gone and decayed and dead. And the eagles are coming in and feeding on it.
Johnny, I'm not disagreeing with you about the Romans being the eagles, but we just got done speaking about the people that were going to come in and claim to be false Christ and taking advantage of. We may also be speaking of the people that recognize that these people are ripe for being taken advantage of, and that they're going to come in and deceive, and in order for their own profit, their own gain.
And that's a valid point. That's exactly how false teachers work. And a valid observation. Now, we're going to shift gears again. That's during the tribulation. So let's go back and let's talk about after the tribulation now. Well, we know what takes place before the tribulation. We know what takes place during the tribulation. Let's talk about after the tribulation. Immediately after, verse 29 says, the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. Now, let's pursue that just for a moment. Where is that language found? Ezekiel 32, 7 through 9. Isaiah 13. Similar language is also found in Acts 2. Well, let's go back to Ezekiel 32. Let's start there. Ezekiel 32, 7. This is where a knowledge of the prophets help us in interpreting New Testament references. And let me illustrate. Let's just suppose that we want to throw the Old Testament out completely, and we don't know anything about the Old Testament. But I want to study and know the New Testament well, and I start in the book of Hebrews. I want to tell you what, it won't make a lick of sense to you. It ain't going to make a lick of sense. Because you're going to be talking about things, you're going to wonder, I don't know what he's talking about. Because you got to know something about the Old Testament to understand Hebrews. You got to know something about the Old Testament to understand Revelation. And the same thing is true here. All through the New Testament, writers borrow language from the Old Testament with which the Jews would have been familiar. This is a Jewish audience Matthew's writing to. Ezekiel 32, talking about the destruction of Egypt. And I won't trace all of those references. But talking about the destruction of Egypt and what God says in essence, and I'm paraphrasing 7 through 9. I'll come back and get some phrasing there. Well, let's get the phrasing first, and I'll tell you what I think he's saying. That I will cover the heavens, make the stars dark, cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give her light. And so what's he saying when Egypt falls and Egypt is captured and destroyed? Is he saying that I'm going to make the sun literally not shine, the moon not literally shine, and the stars are going to fall all the way from heaven? No. He said, I'm going to put her lights out. I'm putting her lights out. It's the downfall of a nation and the upheaval of a nation. Well, similar language was used with reference to Babylon. Let's go to Isaiah 13. If you don't get another reference to enlighten you on this passage, then go to Isaiah 13. Get this one. Isaiah 13:10. This is the fall of Babylon. And the fall of Babylon was the overthrow and the upheaval of a nation. All through the prophets. We get tired of this sometimes, and you hear this sometimes when we're going through, well, this is the same story last week. God overthrown a nation, God overthrown a nation. Sure. We need to be taking heed because this nation that we're living in may be next. God will put our lights out when time comes. And this is what he says concerning them. Look at, for the stars of heaven and their constellation will not give their light. The sun will be dark and go forth, the moon will not be caused to shine. Literally, nothing in history tells us that happened, but it was a description of the upheaval and the overthrow of a nation. So here's a powerful nation turned upside down, basically. Well, here's a powerful nation in Jerusalem that God's going to turn upside down. It refers to a change in order and the downfall of a nation. It's so dramatic that it's like the sun's not shining and the moon's not giving its light. Now let's just suppose, for example, this morning when you got up and you turned the news on, you found out another nation has killed the president, all the Congress, and the Supreme Court. We have no government anymore. Washington, D.C. is just shambles and rumble, just burning trash. And another government has taken over. I want to tell you what my reaction would be. It'd be like the sun not shining and the moon's not shining, and if every star is falling from heaven. You said, well, maybe good for it. Maybe, but I tell you what, it's an upheaval. It's a dramatic change. And that's what he's saying here. All right. Now, verses 30 and 31. Babylon the clocks. Let's see if we can get this. The son of the coming of the Son of Man and the clouds of heaven, that he'll send his angels and let me get verse 30. The Son of Man will appear in heaven, then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. I think that's probably the idea of his coming in judgment. Is probably the idea of that as per Matthew 10 and in verse 23. I want to get down to verse 32. I'm not trying to slack that. I'm just thinking that's really what that's all about in verses 30 and 31. Let's talk about the parable of the fig tree. What's the parable of the fig tree? What's the point of that?
Break branch is tender, it puts forth leaves, so it's summer.
All right, yes. This is when this is all going to happen. We've seen before the tribulation, after the tribulation. And when this happens, when it's going to take place? Well, it says when you see the fig tree bud and blossom forth, you know that spring's near. Just like you go out and see the flowers bloom, you say, well, spring's close by. When you see all these things, when you, the people he's talking to, you might underline you in verse 33, when you see all these things, you know that it's at the doors. It's coming. Now, verse 34. This generation not past all these things be fulfilled. The things he's been talking about before the tribulation, after the tribulation, take place in that generation. Now then, we're ready to shift gears. It's going to take place in their lifetime. Verse 34 is the key to our text. Now he talks about the second coming, I think. You say, how do you know? Of that day, that is when heaven and earth will pass. No one knows, no, not the angels in heaven, but my Father only. Mark's account, and the Son doesn't know. And that is, I think that only the Father knows when he's going to send the Son to return. Now, verse 37 through 39. So we don't know when he's coming. We don't know when the end of time is coming. We see signs of the coming of the destruction of Jerusalem, but we don't know signs concerning the second coming. There's not going to be any warning. Verses 37 to 39, in interest of time, is making this point. It's going to be just like it was in the days of Noah. What were they doing when the flood suddenly came in? They were warned, but they weren't told that tomorrow it's going to be. What are they doing?
They were doing their daily activity.
Daily activities, going back to their daily activity, marrying, giving, and marriage. So when Jesus returns and the end of time comes, what will we be doing? Daily activities, mowing the grass, going to Walmart, sitting in church, sitting in traffic, whatever you normally do. Sitting at the cubicle, working at the computer. Whatever you normally do, that's what we'll be doing when the Lord returns, if he returns in our lifetime. Now, 40 to 44, the premillennialist text talks about the rapture, that two men will be in the field, one taking the other left. The rapture is never mentioned in the New Testament or Old Testament. Genesis, Revelation, rapture is never mentioned, nor the concept thereof. What's he talking about? This is a principle of separation of the righteous and the wicked. That when the end of time comes, there's going to be one taking another left. There'll be two women grinding, and one at the middle, and one taking the other left. And watch, therefore, because you don't know the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. And so, verse 44, here's the key. Therefore, be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour when you do not expect. So the point is, we've got to be ready because we don't know when he's coming. Now, the rest of the chapter is devoted to being ready in this faithful and evil servant, because you don't know when he's coming. We don't know when. Now, I hurriedly looked at that because I wanted to get to this right here. And I borrowed this from Mike Willis, and I think this is from Matthew 24. If you want to copy that, I'll get it to you. Some of you have already asked for that. But anyway, notice the contrast. You have the judgment in Jerusalem on the one side, and then you have the end of time on the other side. And so here when it comes to the matter of the judgment on Jerusalem, it's preceded by signs. But over here, there's no signs given. They're not the same. You can escape over here in the destruction of Jerusalem, but you can't escape over here. There is no escape. Verse 42 and verse 31 of chapter 25. There's no personal coming of Christ. There is a personal coming of Christ. There's judgment on earth over here. The judgment over here is in heaven. They are distinct. Matthew 24 is not talking about the same thing all the way through. Remember, two questions. Jesus answered two questions. You say, well, they thought they were one. Doesn't matter. Don't care. He answered them as they were asked. Make sense?